cut.
Okay.
Push the light on.
We have to push it to talk. We have to push this.
I guess I like it down better.
Subcommittee will come to order. Today we consider steps that the Congress can take to facilitate the creation of a nationwide interoperable broadband network for the first responder community. As the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina starkly revealed, there are serious obstacles that prevent fire, police, and rescue personnel from one locality communicating with first responders from other localities when they converge on the scene of a disaster. In some instances, fire, police, and rescue personnel in a single locality may lack a means of interoperable communication each with the other. For almost a decade, there has been a widely expressed need to create a national, fully interoperable communications network for first responders. But as of today, that network remains a goal. It is not a reality. This morning, we will examine various proposals advanced by the first responder community and by commercial wireless carriers for realization of the National Interoperable Network. In advance of the 700 megahertz auction in 2008, the FCC crafted a plan to auction the 10 megahertz D block of the 700 megahertz spectrum to a commercial carrier, who under the terms of the proposal would then build out the D block with the requisite telecommunications equipment. Under the terms of the auction, the winning commercial bidder would share the 10 megahertz with public safety, and public safety would have priority access to that network. Those terms proved to be unattractive to the commercial carriers, and in the auction, the D block did not receive the auction reserve price and was not sold. It remains unsold at the present time. A variety of proposals have been advanced since the failed D block auction about how the D block could be used to create the much-needed nationwide first responder network. We will examine today the proposals and ask if any of them could result in a true nationwide network built out with the necessary wireless telecommunications equipment. The build-out of the wireless infrastructure would appear to be the largest single challenge, how to finance that. And we will focus our inquiry today on how that build-out could be financed through the various proposals that have been placed before us. One proposal is to give the D block to public safety, and then it would be combined with the 10 megahertz of spectrum already held by the public safety broadband licensee, the Public Safety Spectrum Trust. While this option would clearly give public safety sufficient spectrum for a nationwide broadband network, it would not provide any funding for the build-out with the necessary equipment. While some contend that localities could then lease the 10 megahertz D block received for free under the proposal to commercial entities, and then apply the revenue from that lease to equipment build-out, I question whether sufficient revenue from the lease could be realized, particularly in rural areas, to finance the needed equipment purchase and installation. Another proposal is to auction the 10 megahertz block unencumbered for purely commercial use. The proceeds of that auction would then be used to help fund the build-out of a broadband network on the 10 megahertz of spectrum currently held by the Public Spectrum Safety Trust. This proposal likewise raises questions, given that no one believes the auction would raise sufficient funds to build out a nationwide network, perhaps only realizing a fraction of the total amount that is necessary. Where could public safety find the rest of the money that is needed? Could this proposal also leave smaller and more rural areas that lack financial resources behind? A third option is for the FCC to re-auction the D block for purchase by a commercial carrier to use in a public-private partnership with the public safety broadband licensee. However, to ensure a successful auction, that new auction would have to be restructured to address the concerns of commercial providers that resulted in the failure of a similarly structured auction in 2008. Whichever option is pursued, the most important goal is achieving a true nationwide public safety interoperability function. That means a plan that will ensure universal build-out and will not favor those areas with more resources to invest in a network over others with more limited means. The most critical question for many when determining how best to address the matter is how it will ensure that rural areas and other financially disadvantaged regions are not left behind. We have an historic opportunity to make our nation more secure and to give our first responders a crucial tool they urgently need. And I hope that all members will keep this fundamental goal in mind as we consider how best to proceed. And I expect that this morning we will receive outstanding advice on these matters from our panel of witnesses, and I thank them for their attendance here today. That concludes my statement, and at this time I'm pleased to recognize the ranking Republican on our subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with you that we'll receive outstanding testimony on what to do, and I appreciate you having this hearing on the recent developments on a National Interoperable Public Safety Broadband Network. The Digital Television Transition and Public Safety Act of 2005 cleared 84 megahertz of spectrum formerly occupied by the broadcasters in the 700 megahertz band. Now, of that spectrum, 24 megahertz was meant for first responders to use for interoperable emergency communications. The remaining 60 megahertz was supposed to be auctioned for commercial services. In mid-2007, then FCC Chairman Kevin Martin, he endorsed a proposal to require the winning commercial bidder for 10 megahertz of the spectrum, referred to as the D block, to negotiate a sharing agreement with public safety. In response, on June 29, 2007, Mr. Barton and myself, along with 14 other members, sent the FCC a bipartisan letter predicting that this approach would likely fail. The letter explained that commercial entities would be reluctant to bid on the D block for fear that they would fail to reach an agreement that would meet both their needs and those of public safety, while still enabling them to recover their costs. So, as a result, the letter concluded both the original 24 megahertz earmarked for public safety and the 10 megahertz D block would lay empty. The auction would raise less money for taxpayers, and time would be wasted. The FCC ignored the advice in our letter, and the auction failed as a result. The riskiest option going forward would be for the FCC to try another conditioned auction. Notwithstanding the failure of the D block auction, the FCC issued additional notices in May and September of 2008 proposing a re-auction of the D block with public safety conditions, although it sought comment on how it might revise those conditions to improve the likelihood of success this time. The FCC did not take action on the proposal before Chairman Martin left. So I'm concerned that few commercial providers will want to bid even with revisions, since all the winner obtain is the right to negotiate with public safety. Most of the public safety community appears to agree that the conditioned auction approach is not worth pursuing. Instead, some argue that Congress pass a law to give the D block directly to the public safety community for free. The public safety community would then use the spectrum for construction of the nationwide public safety network in combination with the original 24 megahertz, the DTV legislation cleared for first responders. It could do so on its own or partner with commercial entities to do so. This would do little good, however, absent funding to construct the network. Now, another option is to use revenue from a straight commercial auction of the D block to fund a network on the 24 megahertz first responders already have. 10 megahertz of the original 24 megahertz, the DTV legislation cleared for first responders, could be enough for the public safety network. Many public safety officials have filed waivers with the FCC to start building networks on the spectrum they already have access to. And even if it were not enough, proponents of this approach argued that public safety could switch from narrowband voice to voice over Internet protocol and use all of the 24 megahertz for the broadband network. Cities such as New York are already indicating they are considering to do so. This approach would make more spectrum available for commercial broadband service at a time when demand is increasing, but the supply of available spectrum is actually running low. This would also address the money issue, but some don't think wireless companies would be interested in building or serving the network. So, my colleagues, no matter which option we choose to pursue, it is clear that past auction conditions do not work. We do not want to delay any further. I'm glad we're having the hearing. We need to get it correct, and I look forward to hearing from our witness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. The public safety communications has really been a long-standing concern of mine, and that's why I joined with my colleague, Mr. Shimkus, to form the E911 caucus almost 10 years ago. It's hard to believe that it was that long ago. And during that time, we've worked on numerous projects to keep Americans safe and secure and to advance, most importantly, first responder communications at the ground level. Public safety concerns have evolved, especially since 9/11, when we were reminded in very, very stark terms that interoperability is the glue that holds together the call centers, the first responders, and other emergency personnel. Interoperability is interdependent on an often scarce and valuable public resource, which is spectrum. The spectrum halves can provide better safety resources and employ the most advanced technological tools. But the spectrum have-nots face the prospect of seeing people die or being injured instead of surviving during a crisis. The issue before us, I think, is a matter of trust, whether we trust the new commission to resolve the long-suffering D-block issue through the rulemaking process. Can they make the so-called restructured public-private partnership auction work? Those of us who lived through the D-block false start auction do not want to go through another incarnation of that process. 12 cities are biting at the bit, trying to get at the 10 megahertz, the 700 megahertz public safety broadband spectrum currently licensed to the Public Safety Spectrum Trust, including the San Francisco Bay Regional Interoperable Communication System. They're shovel-ready, and I think there's no reason to wait. I'm not sure about the other proposals, and I wonder who ultimately benefits. On the one hand, the major cities' chiefs ask for the spectrum without an auction, but a number of regions might not need that much spectrum. Then we have carriers who are willing to pay big, no doubt, to get the same spectrum at auction. They claim to be willing to use funds siphoned off from the top of the auction's proceeds to construct an interoperable broadband network for public safety. So we're here today to hear from everyone. I want to know if we can move ahead now, not only in my district, but also what the best use is for this essential public trust. So I welcome all the witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eshoo. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm honored to be followed by my colleague and friend, Anna Eshoo, who we've done great work along with the community, and we look forward to continuing that effort. You have done, Mr. Chairman, a good job outlining the options we have. That's why you all are here to answer questions and testify, so we can kind of help direct how do we address this problem. So I won't reiterate that. What I will say that, unfortunately, this is the example of the, although we're interested and we're here and you're here, the intensity of the public interest in this obviously has fallen off. And with the FBI investigation going now on an unspecified list of supposed terrorists and an unspecified target list, this room should be flooded with people, because we have said numerous times, and I know Anna has, we can't sustain another failure in communication in a major catastrophe. And unless we get this D-block right, that's what we're going to have. And so we have to get to it. So the chairman's outlined the options. We're going to look forward to hearing your testimony. I would just like using the bully pulpit to mention to the chairman, I'd like to see us move on H.R. 3348, which would extend the grants program. There's some bills out there that would do that. I think that's important, something we could do now, and it's well agreed to, and probably it could do on a suspension calendar if we could do that. And one thing that hasn't been talked about, which has been raised, is the issue of a regional approach on auction issues. I know people have addressed rural concerns, and that should be part of the debate. That's what I'll be looking for also. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimkus. The chairman of the Full Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing and thank all of our witnesses for agreeing to come and share their knowledge and ideas on how to achieve nationwide public safety interoperability. This is certainly the unfinished business from 9/11 and Katrina, and it's an urgent matter. As the FCC commissioners recognized at our hearing last week, resolution of this issue needs immediate attention, and while the FCC will certainly play a leading role, a number of the proposals, if pursued, would require additional legislative action by the Congress. During the last Congress, I was supportive of the concept of a public-private partnership, and I continue to believe that some form of a public-private partnership would likely offer the clearest path to constructing a nationwide interoperable broadband network. Of course, the details of such an arrangement matter, and in light of the failure of the D-block auction, we need to revisit these details. I'm encouraged by the efforts of both the public safety community and the private sector to think creatively about building this network, and I'm pleased to see that they have come up with a full range of ideas, which we will learn more about today. I'd like to thank particularly Chairman Bratton, Chief Bratton of the LAPD for being with us. Thank you for being here. As we listen to these proposals, I want you to know that there are three basic principles that I have in mind for any plan to address. First, the network or networks must be built quickly. Secondly, there must be a clear plan to ensure that deployment reaches all areas of the country, including hard-to-reach rural areas and underfunded municipalities. Third, the plan should try to avoid distorting or disrupting the commercial wireless marketplace by giving an unfair advantage to certain carriers over others. This is an important hearing, Chairman Boucher. I appreciate your holding it, and it gives us an opportunity to learn more about this very important matter. To our witnesses, thank you for your participation and your testimony, and look forward to the conclusion of the hearing and looking over the transcript and getting some ideas from this hearing today. Yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Chairman Waxman. The ranking Republican member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing, along with Ranking Member Stearns, and we're certainly glad that our full committee chairman, Mr. Waxman, is also in attendance. Mr. Chairman, if the FCC had listened to me, Mr. Stearns, Mr. Upton, and several others several years ago, we wouldn't be having this hearing. We, along with 13 other of our colleagues from both sides of the aisle, I might point out, wrote to the FCC in June of 2007 warning that placing public safety conditions on commercial use of the D-block would almost certainly fail from both a public safety and a commercial perspective. Not listening, the FCC went forward anyway and botched the auction. Both the 24 megahertz cleared for public safety by the 2005 DT fee legislation and the 10 megahertz D block originally intended for commercial use have been sidelined. Potential auction proceeds have been lost and 2 years have been wasted. So here we are again. Some are proposing we simply try the conditioned auction approach again. I strongly urge the FCC, and if we need to, as a subcommittee and full committee, to inform the FCC not to do that. I don't think that will work. If it didn't work the first time, there's no reason to expect that it will work the second time. Passing legislation giving the D block directly to public safety for free would give them control over the spectrum. And my guess is that some of our witnesses are going to advocate that today. But that's not going to help if we don't have the money to build it out. An unconditioned commercial auction of the D block could help raise money to build a public safety network on the 24 megahertz that the 2005 DTV legislation has already cleared for first responders. That is also a non-regulatory way to promote wireless competition and advance our broadband deployment. Some are skeptical that commercial providers would help construct the network and provide the service under this scenario. There are some that would also argue from an engineering perspective that 24 megahertz is not enough to create the public safety network. I hope that we have some expert testimony on that issue here today. Here's an idea. Why don't we start by answering the engineering question first, Mr. Chairman? I'm an engineer. I still have my engineering license. I'm not an electrical engineer, however, so I would be worthless if they delegated that job to me. But I do know how to solve a problem from an engineering perspective. Once we know what's technologically possible, then we can debate the public policy, and then we can look at the politics of the public policy. All too often, whether it's here or in the network neutrality debate, we send policy wonks and bureaucrats to do what us engineers could do without the policy wonks and without the politicians. Let's get to work, Mr. Chairman. Now yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barbour. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing on how we can achieve a national interoperable broadband network for public safety. Last year, when the D-block auction failed, we convened a hearing to discuss with the Federal Communications Commission on how to move forward. Our witnesses today present us with a few options that warrant review at the FCC, and I'd like to know how their proposals address the largest hurdles to the original auction. Those hurdles being the unique needs of public safety network, the high-cost areas of our country to serve like rural northern Michigan, and the need for this network to reach nearly 99% coverage to be truly national. A public safety network cannot operate like a commercial network. You can have a drop call on a commercial service, but a drop call for public safety can be a difference between life and death. When disaster strikes, such as a hurricane, consumers do not expect their cell service to be 100% intact, but public safety does not have that luxury. I've made it clear that a robust national interoperable public safety network will need federal funding to become a reality. My colleagues were split 50-50 when I offered an amendment at the DTV markup years ago to use the revenue from the 700 megahertz auction to build the network. We missed our opportunity to make progress on this critical issue then, and today we're still at first base. This year, I offered an amendment that was accepted by this committee during the markup of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus package, to ensure that interoperable communications needs in high-cost areas were eligible for grant funding. However, even a full amount of money in the stimulus bill broadband funding would not meet the estimated cost of a national interoperable public safety network, which ranges anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thanks for holding today's hearing. I look forward to discussing this with our witnesses on how we can overcome these hurdles encountered by last year's auction. But I must remind the committee and everyone else we've been talking about interoperability since 1978 with the Air Florida crash, and I'm sure we'll be talking about interoperability 2048 with the next disaster. I don't think we're going to make much progress, but look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stupak. Hopefully we will make some progress with all of our shared efforts. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
2 minutes.
Chairman, for holding this important hearing, and thank you all, gentlemen, for being here to share your thoughts and how to solve this problem. Here we are 8 years after September 11th, and we have no interoperable plan. We thought we did, but embarrassingly, the FCC failed to recognize that when you place obligations and restrictions on an asset that you've reduced the value and therefore reduced the value to zero. So we're still in the same place we were the day after September 11th. It's extremely important that we set up an interoperable system that allows all of our first responders, our police, law enforcement agencies, fire and rescue, and other agencies to all work together at a time of disaster. This includes not only the ability to talk to each other and coordinate, but in today's world that also means video, which means broadband. So maybe it's a good thing that the FCC screwed it up and we made sure that we have enough spectrum to be able to do a proper job on interoperability. But let's learn from the embarrassing experience the FCC caused or a couple years ago with the D block auction. Let's move forward and let's get the right plan. We're here today to hear your ideas of how to move forward on this, and I thank you for taking your time. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher, for convening today's hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for coming here today to talk to us. In particular, I'm glad to welcome Mr. Fonts for coming. He's from, or has roots in Manteca, California, which is in my district. Now, there are a wide agreement about the potential benefits of a national interoperable public safety network. My district not only is home for Mr. Fonts, but also home for some of the most active earthquake faults in North America. So I understand the urgency of the problem. I know there's been some problems in the past, but I think given the several different proposals that we've seen and heard of, these all merit our consideration and respect. I'm confident with members of the committee, the FCC, and all the stakeholders that we can find a solution that makes sense. We don't need to repeat the embarrassing mistakes of the past. So this hearing is a positive step in the right direction. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNerney. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome our witnesses also. We are very pleased that you are here, and as you are hearing from everyone up here, we realize that things need to be done differently this time around, and so we appreciate that you are helping us revisit what happened with the D block. We realize that there should be some lessons learned, and we've had some successes in the past, and we've had some not so successful outcomes. As we look at this and as we hear from you today, we want to keep in mind the consumer needs that are there, the public safety, consumer choice, the ever-changing technologies that are also being developed and innovated, and then the need for competition within the broadband industry. I'm really concerned, and I'll be interested to hear from you all on what you think the amount of spectrum we really need to fulfill the public safety needs. Is the 24 megahertz enough? Do we need to look at more of this? What was the problem with the additional 10 megahertz that we felt like could be the dual use there? So I think that those questions are best answered by you all and by engineers. As Ranking Member Barton said, you know, you're the engineers looking at it. You know how to solve this problem, what the expansion of and the use of that spectrum can be. We all support a broadband, a good, solid broadband policy, and want to see us make the most of this. And hearing from you today is important. I hope we learn our lessons well. Welcome to the committee, and I yield my time back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue of for first responders is very important in Vermont, just as much as it is in LA and every one of your communities. And in Vermont, the police are doing a survey, and what they found was that 77% said that coverage was the biggest problem in our region. 27% of the respondents, these are law enforcement folks and first responder communities, stated that the current radio channels are at capacity and often congested. Interoperability continues to be a huge problem. What I'm going to hope for in your testimony from a Vermont perspective, but I think this will apply in general, is the consideration of the following. One, cost allocation for a build-out of a national system utilizing the D block spectrum. Two, specific challenges for border communities. Vermont has experienced real difficulties relating to a 1962 treaty which limits use of certain spectrum 100 kilometers from the border. And three, how topography affects the efficacy of the 700 megahertz system. Overall, there's basically three things that have to be considered going forward. It's how do we build the system, how do we make it interoperable, and how do we allow for competition so that the competition itself is going to be an incentive and a promoter of getting the job done. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welsh. The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Listening to this comments, I'm sort of thinking a real discussion is how do we free spectrum from cell block D? It sort of reminds me of a Escape from Alcatraz movie, and we're trying to free the spectrum. Most of our interest has been discussed. I just hope that the panel will discuss how we do this in a way that actually allows the financing of the construction of these networks, in fact, for public safety. It's important to finance it to actually get it done, and I'll look forward to testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Inslee. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Murphy, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As Mr. Welsh mentioned, although a lot of the attention in our public safety communications infrastructure has been focused on Louisiana and New York City, in Connecticut and Vermont and across the nation, we have daily communication gaps. And it has caused the rise of companies like one in my district, Mutual Link, which has developed web-based software that allows for very divergent technologies of communication systems to talk to each other. And I hope that one of the things that we talk about today, in addition to a lot of the very important topics raised by my colleagues, is the ability of companion software and companion technology to try to help solve some of the existing gaps that are in existence today, that even if we solve this problem of the spectrum going forward, we're going to need to solve in the short term. But also that we focus not only on the issue of money and how we make sure that we have the capacity to build this system, not only on the questions Mr. Bratton raised relative to technology, but timing as well. What is, in any of these scenarios, the realistic timing, and what are our strategies in the interim to try to remedy those gaps as companies like the one I mentioned are trying to do. I thank the witnesses for being here today. I thank the chairman for the hearing. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher, very much for calling this important hearing on broadband across the country, and particularly relating to our first responders. You know, coming from Florida here in late September, we're always mindful of the threat of hurricanes. And while we're fortunate we've had a fairly mild season, the 2004 season is still very fresh. And what I hear from first responders back home is that they have all the will in the world, but we need your expert advice to show us the way to accomplish this and get it done. So I'll be intently interested in your testimony today, and thank you very much for being here. I yield back my time.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Castor, and thanks to all of the members who've made opening comments this morning. We want to welcome now our panel of witnesses, and I'll simply say a brief word of introduction about each and then call on each in turn for their testimony. Mr. William Bratton is the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department and is testifying this morning on behalf of the Major Cities Chiefs Association. Dr. Brian Fonts is CEO of the National Emergency Number Association. Chief Harlin McEwen is chairman of the Public Safety Spectrum Trust Corporation and chairman of the Communications and Technology Committee of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Mr. Jason Barbour is the 9/11 director for Johnston County, North Carolina. Mr. Stacey Black is assistant vice president for market development and mobility product management at AT&T. Mr. Joseph Hanley is Vice President for Technical Planning and Services for Telephone and Data Systems, Inc., the parent company of United States Cellular Corporation. And Dr. Kostas Liopiros is the founder of the Sunfire Group. We welcome each of our witnesses. Without objection, your prepared written statement will be made a part of our record, and we would welcome your oral summary of approximately 5 minutes each. And Chief Bratton will be happy to begin with you.
Good morning, Chairman Boucher and members of the committee. My name is William Bratton, and I currently serve as Chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today to discuss this critical issue. I am here today speaking on behalf of the Major City Chiefs Association, which is comprised of the police chiefs of the 63 largest police departments in the United States and Canada. The 56 U.S. cities represented are America's centers of industry, transportation, education, and commerce. Their police departments provide public safety services to roughly 40% of America's population. As you're well aware, the Federal Communications Commission auctioned portions of the 700 megahertz spectrum in 2008, and although a total auction proceeds significantly exceeded expectations, one block of spectrum, the D block, failed to attract a successful bidder. This was in part because of a requirement that the winning bidder had to construct a broadband wireless network built to public safety standards using the combined D block and the adjacent public safety 700 megahertz spectrum. Under current law, the FCC is required to auction the D block. We believe this course of action is not in the public interest, since it would likely generate little revenue for the federal government and allocates commercial use scarce spectrum resources urgently needed by public safety. The major city chiefs urge the committee and Congress to consider an alternative, enact legislation to reassign the D block from the auction pool and reallocate it to public safety. This action would result in a strong foundation for a sustainable nationwide public safety wireless broadband network. In my 40-year law enforcement career, I've been both a witness to and a part of the evolution in policing technology. When I began as a police officer in Boston, the walkie-talkies that were available to us were so big and bulky that no one even wanted to carry them. While as commissioner at the NYPD, we developed a CompStat model that utilized timely information gained through technology, and we were able to drastically reduce crime in that city. Today, many agencies have established real-time crime centers that are leveraging new technology to do an even more effective job of fighting crime. Very soon, we will be moving to a predictive policing model, where by studying real-time crime patterns, we can anticipate where a crime is likely to occur. Without question, this evolution has been driven by the improvements and need for information technology. Of course, in order to be useful, information needs to be relevant, accurate, and timely. But just as important, it must be accessible. New technologies such as automated license plate readers, biometrics, medical telemetry, automated vehicle locators, and streaming video only scratch the surface of the capabilities that will be carried by broadband networks. The D block is critical for the accessibility of information to first responders across our nation. Although some have questioned how to offset the potential loss of revenue resulting from the D block being taken off the auction block, we see this scenario in fundamentally different terms. We view the reallocation of the D block as a critically needed investment in public safety rather than a loss of revenue. This investment of spectrum into public safety will reap large dividends far into the future with reduced crime and victims. Let me offer an example. In Los Angeles, a recent Rand Corporation study showed the negative economic impact of a single homicide in my city is $4 million. Now, mind you, this $4 million figure is actually a conservative number. Utilizing technology, we've been able to reduce the number of homicides in Los Angeles by over 300 over the last several years. This has resulted in a net positive economic impact of $1.2 billion to my city. Coincidentally, my budget is $1.2 billion. Thus, because of our crime reduction efforts, we have actually become revenue neutral. Investing the D block spectrum for use by public safety will benefit both urban areas as well as rural areas. In urban areas, the full amount of spectrum will be necessary to support the myriad of current and emerging broadband applications that are transforming public safety operations nationwide. In rural areas, the added spectrum can be used as collateral to form public-private partnerships, thereby reducing or eliminating a financial burden that such jurisdictions would otherwise have to assume to either build their own network or become a subscriber on a less reliable commercial broadband network. After the failure of the D block auction last year, there was significant confusion in the public safety community about how best to proceed with this critical issue. I am pleased to report today that in the last 5 months, the 8 major public safety organizations have come together in an unprecedented effort to forge a consensus on how to make a wireless public safety broadband network a reality. At this time, I would like to briefly address the issue of the pending waiver requests. Under current FCC rules, the existing 10 megahertz of spectrum assigned to public safety licensee, PSBL, cannot be utilized and remains fallow. Currently, 13 jurisdictions, including many represented by you, have filed waiver requests with the FCC seeking to build local or regional broadband wireless networks utilizing this spectrum prior to the construction of a national network. It is apparent that the communities, large and small, urban and rural, have come to a realization that a public safety broadband wireless network is a critical and urgent need. They have also come to the conclusion that they can construct local networks either alone or through a public-private partnership arrangement. We urge the FCC to expeditiously review the pending waiver requests and grant all requests that meet their requirements. Granting waivers to jurisdictions with qualified proposals will permit early build-out of local and regional broadband networks. I conclude my testimony. In closing, we urge that you take the legislative action necessary to invest this spectrum in public safety nationwide. The benefits gained from such an investment in first responder communications will dramatically transform how we serve the public we have all sworn to protect. Thank you for this opportunity to address these important issues.
Thank you very much, Chief Bratton. We now have 2 recorded votes pending on the floor of the House. I think we have time to hear from Dr. Fonts, and then the committee will take a brief recess while members respond to the call of the House. Dr. Fonts, we'll be pleased to hear from you.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank you, Mr. Stearns, and other members of this subcommittee. My name is Brian Fonts, and I represent the National Emergency Number Association. NENA is a representation organization of over 7,000 dedicated 911 and emergency communication professionals who receive and manage nearly 250 million 911 calls annually. In reality, these public safety individuals are the first link in the emergency response chain that so many Americans rely on. Before I continue, there are 2 members of this committee who are not here, and I understand their demands for their role in the E911 caucus as co-chairs from the House side, and that's Representatives Eshoo and Simkus. I also want to extend my appreciation to other members of this committee for their commitment to the caucus and also for their commitment to the advancement of 911. Wireless broadband is obviously very important, and in a day and age when many sectors of the economy rely on broadband services, public safety should have that same opportunity to do so. It is obvious that dealing with voice, video, and data is in fact critical. What's quite interesting as I reviewed many of the filings and certainly in the testimonies presented here, there's so much agreement that exists among the public safety organizations and frankly by some of the comments that you've made today in your opening statements. We all agree that broadband, both wired and wireless, provides significant public safety benefits. A network for public safety must be available nationwide, rural as well as urban centers. We all agree that there must be funding to build this network, to operate it, to maintain it, to buy the equipment and the applications necessary. Public safety needs to be able to take advantage of the significant research and development that's been poured into the commercial sector and to be able to utilize that investment. We all agree that the network must meet the significant and reasonable needs of public safety. Agreement on these issues and a lack, let me repeat that, and the lack of federal funding for a nationwide public safety broadband network is in large part why the FCC initiated the D-Block public-private partnership that started this whole debate. However, recognizing that this proposal was not necessarily designed correctly, the auction was not successful. We do believe, and I believe, that with some modifications and some corrections, and particularly to the point that you had made, Mr. Chairman, about the uncertainty associated with the auction once you won the bid, that the auction could, in fact, move forward. But NENA also recognizes that there may, in fact, be another failure if the Commission were to move in that direction. And so we proposed yet another alternative. And that proposal, we believe, presents significant benefits to public safety, while also, like other proposals, would require congressional action. We believe that the 10 megahertz that is available in the public safety band be married to the D block and auctioned as a 20 megahertz block. Most parties in the technical world will realize that a 20 megahertz block provides the efficiencies needed for broadband for public safety as well as commercial use. We believe that this marriage provides substantial benefits to public safety. We would propose that half the auction revenues generated from a 20 megahertz auction be put into a broadband trust as initial start for access to that network. We believe that the licensee should have imposed upon it aggressive but achievable nationwide build-out requirements, that public safety have access to all 20 megahertz and, when needed, priority access. We believe that's a benefit. Public safety access to the network at a known discounted rate should also be established before the auction. And with the established reoccurring revenue source to continually provide funds, in essence, the funding issue that we all raised today, this proposal provides yet another option to be considered. To be sure, different options have been proposed by other public safety organizations and some wireless carriers. While we share many of the same goals, what really is the crux of the issue here is what will assure a nationwide broadband network with a funding mechanism that will encourage and provide for build-out nationwide. And that is it. With that said, Nina asked the following two overarching factors, that they be nationwide and that there be funding made available. I strongly encourage you, actually all of us, to look at unconventional and perhaps, yes, initially unpopular ideas that may result in a known and reoccurring source of funding, again, a primary concern here, for public safety's broadband network. For example, at last week's FCC oversight hearing, Chairman Janikowski referred to the E-rate as one of the great successes of the 1996 Telecom Act, ensuring access to the Internet for our nation's schools and libraries. If access to broadband for public safety is as important as we all know it is, then surely we can come up with an innovative funding proposal, as we did for the schools and libraries over a decade. This is a monumental effort. There's no doubt about it. Nina stands ready to work with all of you and certainly all of public safety to make this nationwide broadband network, the funding available for it, to become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fonts. I'm going to ask unanimous consent to put three statements in today's record: a letter from the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International, a letter from T-Mobile USA, and a statement from the Chief of the Newport, Vermont Police. Without objection, so ordered. We are going to stand in recess until the conclusion of these two votes. It should not be very long, half hour at most, I think, probably less. So please be patient, and we will return shortly.
name's right behind the water.
We want to break up the festivities, but I think that we can get back to our witnesses as you're taking your seats. I think that Chief McEwen is next. Someone get him? Uh-huh.
Yeah, the one.
Okay. Okay. Chief McEwen, you are on. I understand the challenge. It's hard for us to get to our seats, too. Turn your microphone on and
Thank you.
thank you.
Acting Chairman. And thank you, Chairman Boucher and Ranking Member Stearns and the distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today. We applaud the efforts of the subcommittee members and other members of Congress for your continuing interest and support in our efforts to create a nationwide public safety wireless broadband network. My name is Harlin McEwen, and I'm the retired police chief for the city of Ithaca, New York, and I'm also retired as a deputy assistant director of the FBI in Washington. I serve as the chairman of the Communications and Technology Committee of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, a position I've held for more than 30 years. I also serve as the elected chairman of the Public Safety Spectrum Trust, a nonprofit corporation that consists of representatives of 15 national public safety organizations. The principal purpose of the PSST is to serve as the licensee and manager for the 700 megahertz nationwide public safety broadband license, commonly referred to as the PSBL. The PSBL was granted to the PSST on November 19, 2007, and includes the 10 megahertz of broadband spectrum that is intended to be one half of the spectrum that will be used to develop a shared commercial public safety network. The other half of the spectrum will come from the so-called D block. This is not the first time I have appeared before you on this topic, but I want to once again stress why it's so important for the United States to have a nationwide public safety broadband network. Any review of major crises such as 9/11 or Katrina shows how much the personal efforts and effectiveness of our nation's first responders, police, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and others are diminished or undermined when the communications infrastructure that supports our efforts fails or is insufficient for the needs of public safety professionals. Our vision is to embrace the capabilities of broadband technology, but at the same time not forget that public safety needs a network that is hardened to withstand catastrophes and has extended backup power, satellite backup, and other important features so that it will be available and reliable in a crisis. Establishing and building out the wireless broadband network will be a significant challenge, but it is one that very much needs to be done to meet our national security and public safety needs for the years to come. As you are aware, the 700 megahertz spectrum auction conducted by the FCC in early 2008 did not attract a winning bid for the D block. Since then, the FCC has sought several rounds of comment on various new proposals and options, but has taken no further action. During the past 16 or so months, the PSST and the public safety community have worked diligently to examine options that will enable us to be successful and also preserve requirements that will result in a network design to deliver up-to-date, affordable, and interoperable broadband communications capabilities to our country's first responders. The PSST has been working with the FCC as it also examines various options. In the total absence of conventional funding alternatives, the PSST supports the public-private partnership concept, where the private partners, which will be using some of the shared spectrum for their own commercial purposes and profit, will be the principal source of financial support to the PSST. For example, the second report and order envisions that the use of public safety spectrum by the private partners will be under a lease agreement with the PSST. Since I last appeared before you, we've worked hard to achieve consensus within the public safety community to move this process forward. All of the major national public safety organizations, with the exception of the National Emergency Number Association, have reached consensus on the preferred approach for success. The consensus position is for Congress to adopt legislation that will direct the FCC to remove auction requirements from the D block and to instead allocate it to the National Public Safety Broadband License. This would then give public safety 20 megahertz of broadband spectrum that would enable us to proceed with public-private partnerships through a request for proposal process that would identify the best private partners to build out the network. This will also give us the ability to develop strong public-private partnerships locally and nationally that will provide the private funding necessary through network leasing and sharing agreements without requiring dependence on federal, state, and local funding or auction revenue. We look forward to working with you in this committee to make the public safety broadband network a reality in the near future. We urge you to support the proposed legislation and consensus position that I have described. Our efforts to get a nationwide public safety wireless broadband network have been going on for a very long time, and we now call upon you to help us achieve this most important public safety goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Barbour.
Thank you, Acting Chairman, Chairman Boucher, and Ranking Member Stearns, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to appear before you here today. My name is Jason Barbour. I am serving as the 911 Director for Johnston County, located in North Carolina. I'm also an active captain with the Town of Clayton Fire Department, as well as a Deputy Sheriff for Johnston County. I am the past president for the National Emergency Number Association, commonly referred to as NENA. I currently serve as NENA's representative on the Public Safety Spectrum Trust, commonly referred to as the PSST. I'm also a member of the Association of Public Safety Communication Officials International, commonly referred to as APCO. While I am actively involved in all of these organizations, I am here today only on the behalf of Johnston County, a rural yet fast-growing county in eastern North Carolina. In my testimony today, I would like to make 3 points. First, broadband technologies provide significant benefits for emergency communications. Ensuring that public safety agencies and emergency responders are connected to broadband, wireline, and wireless must be a national priority. Second, any actions taken by Congress or the FCC must ensure that a sustainable funding source is in place to pay for public safety's access to and use of broadband. Third, any proposal for the establishment of a wireless public safety broadband network must take into consideration the needs of rural America and ensure that access to the network in all areas of the country. How do we get there in rural America? No one doubts the potential of broadband for public safety in areas urban and rural. However, in rural America, there are legitimate questions concerning how wireless public safety broadband network can be paid for and built out. No one doubts that public safety agencies would love to have access to their own network and operate their own broadband network. But the reality is, in many areas, there's simply no way to fund the build-out and continued use of such network. Whether public safety has access to 10, 20, 50 megahertz of spectrum, the spectrum is only as good as the ability to pay for it and build it out. That is why I, along with the rest of the national public safety community, was particularly interested in the FCC's original D-block concept, in which public safety would have access to a broadband network but would not have to pay for the cost of building the network. Whether or not the original D-block public-private partnership can still work is a legitimate question. A known funding source and a known build-out schedule were important 2 years ago, and regardless of the specific plan that is adopted, they remain critical issues today, particularly in rural America.
I commend all the organizations involved in this debate for putting the ideas on the table intended to result in the positive solutions for public safety. Without commenting on any of the individual proposals, I believe several questions must be answered. First and foremost, is there an identified reoccurring funding source to pay for access to and use of the network for all areas? Will the proposal result in a nationwide wireless broadband network? Is there a high likelihood of success that such a network will be built out nationally on a known schedule? Will the network meet the reasonable needs and important needs of public safety? Will the plan ensure that public safety remains current and has current benefits from the commercial research and development? If the plan calls for a public-private partnership, is there sufficient oversight by the FCC or appropriate authority to ensure that such agreements are adhered to? If an approach is adopted that does not involve an auction with build-out requirements by commercial entities, is there sufficient evidence to conclude that there is a need for additional spectrum in rural areas, and therefore an assurance that non-mandatory partnerships will emerge and result in a nationwide network being built in less populated areas? I am particularly interested in the answers of these questions for rural America. Whatever the details of any plan may be, it is essential that they are reviewed to ensure that the result is a nationwide network or network of networks sufficient to meet the needs of public safety, and that near and long-term funding is available for public safety to access and use the network. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be here today.
Thank you for your excellent testimony. Mr. Black?
Acting Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss AT&T's support of public safety's proposals for the implementation of interoperable wireless broadband. As AT&T has been a leading provider of wireless data services to the public safety community for over a decade, we have a unique perspective that drives our rationale for this support. AT&T's support of public safety's desire to build out regional networks is based on our experience that agencies want the ability to tailor a network to meet their unique local needs. First, agencies need the flexibility to choose a network management model that meets their financial as well as their communications requirements. Secondly, local agencies have a better understanding of the terrain and population centers that will or will not require coverage. Lastly, local deployments can be constructed using existing grants and procurement programs that have been traditionally used for land mobile radio and other communications at a much lower cost than what a nationwide network would entail. One of the concerns that have been expressed about this regional approach is that it may not include small and rural communities. AT&T supports a unique proposal that could dramatically reduce the cost of a typical broadband deployment, thus making it affordable to provide coverage for smaller communities. This approach has been referred to as the leveraged network model, as it provides a dedicated private network experience that leverages the core infrastructure of a commercial operator. This model has the potential to jumpstart deployment of regional networks since most of the core build-out has already been completed. This model addresses two primary concerns of public safety. It gives them exclusive access to spectrum, eliminating the concern of sharing with commercial users, and it reduces the overall cost by leveraging the commercial operator's existing core network and provisioning, support, and billing systems. AT&T also supports and applauds public safety's recommendation of LTE as the common technology standard. Known as long-term evolution, LTE is an internationally recognized wireless standard that is for next-generation broadband. The LTE standard will benefit public safety in many ways. First, it will assure that each network, even those that are built independent of each other, will allow seamless roaming for visiting public safety users. It will encourage early deployment and will build momentum among public safety agencies, and as more regional networks are deployed, they will form the backbone of a network of networks that will ultimately provide public safety with interoperable broadband across the country. Second, it will allow public safety to leverage the massive economies of scale of the commercial operators who are also deploying LTE at 700 megahertz. Third, it will allow a region to confidently design and deploy a network knowing that it will be interoperable with later deployed networks. Lastly, AT&T envisions that public safety users will be able to roam from networks onto commercial networks as seamlessly as cellular phones roam today. Finally, AT&T supports public safety's request to reallocate the D block as public safety spectrum to provide a full 20 megahertz of broadband capacity. Over the last 5 years, as AT&T has introduced next-generation wireless data capabilities, public safety applications have become more bandwidth intensive, and average data usage has doubled each year from 11 megabits per user in 2005 to almost 200 megabits per user per month in 2009. Our experience tells us that as public safety deploys LTE, the vendor community will begin to develop new applications that require even more bandwidth. By providing the full 20 megahertz now, public safety will be able to deploy a single base station radio and devices that utilize the contiguous spectrum instead of being forced to add non-contiguous spectrum at a later time, which will require new equipment and additional taxpayer expense. Another thing to consider is that public safety is unique in that during an incident or an emergency, network demand is typically concentrated in a small geographic area. While commercial carriers can deploy additional capacity at pre-planned events, public safety does not have the luxury of planning the next disaster or incident that will likely involve multiple jurisdictions in a defined geographic area. Therefore, having the full 20 megahertz throughout a broadband deployment will provide public safety the additional capacity when needed most during emergencies. Reallocating the D block to public safety while using the leverage network model will benefit the smaller and rural communities that may not have all the funding needed to deploy a dedicated broadband network. Not only will the build-out cost be reduced, but it also provides these communities the spectrum needed to incent a commercial operator to enter into a private-public partnership that will result not only in broadband for public safety, but for the community as well. In closing, we encourage you to engage the public safety community on these proposals directly, as they are the true beneficiaries of them. However, AT&T feels strongly that this is the last and best opportunity to provide public safety with the broadband capability that it needs in pursuit of its mission. It's simply the right thing to do. Thank you, and I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Hanley. Welcome.
Acting Chairman Eshoo, Ranking Member Stearns, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Joe Hanley, and I am a Vice President at TDS, the parent company of U.S. Cellular. U.S. Cellular serves over 6.2 million customers and has received 8 consecutive J.D. Power Awards for highest quality in the North Central region. In addition to commercial users, our networks serve hundreds of public safety agencies. Like other wireless carriers, we need more spectrum to support fourth-generation services. U.S. Cellular is prepared to play a significant role in the shared network I will discuss. 2 goals are essential to the public interest. First, we must provide nationwide interoperable broadband services for public safety. These services must be available throughout the nation, not just for a few select communities. They should be provided at the lowest possible cost to taxpayers and public safety agencies. The second goal is to expand competitive broadband services for consumers. Broadband is a powerful catalyst for economic growth. However, spectrum, the lifeblood of broadband services and wireless competition, has become highly concentrated, and more must be made available. The good news is that these 2 goals are highly complementary. This is not a choice between helping public safety or providing broadband services to consumers. Shared networks and shared use mean lower costs and better services for all users, and the combined user base may be essential to getting cost-effective equipment for this band. There are 2 potential paths. First, a group of public safety organizations is asking Congress to reallocate the D block, creating a combined 20 megahertz block licensed to the PSST. This proposal can provide a basis for moving forward, but it needs to be enhanced to ensure a full partnership between commercial operators and public safety, with a fair opportunity for non-national carriers. We are encouraged by statements suggesting that many needed elements are already on the table: shared commercial public safety use, commercial construction and operation of the network, participation of regional and smaller carriers, and competitive bidding for partners. Legislation must make these concepts explicit, and we recommend the following improvements. First, the legislation should require that the FCC adopt rules for a fair selection process, including non-national carriers. Second, it should provide for commercial use of a reasonable portion of the overall 20 megahertz of capacity. Third, it should promote long-term stability and operator continuity, similar to what the operator would have as a licensee. Fourth, it should require reasonably sized geographic areas for regional partnerships. States or the 55 regional planning areas would work. Let's turn to the second option, which is available now to the FCC under existing law. Since the auction, there has been recognition that an all-or-nothing national license contributed to the auction's failure. Consensus has developed on improvements, including regional licensing, and public safety has made progress on standards, including a technology choice, LTE. After granting waivers for a few early builds, we propose a two-stage auction. Stage 1 would include commercial bidders and would generate revenues for the Treasury. In Stage 2, for any license left unsold, the PSST could submit a bid with no monetary payment, but a best efforts commitment to build the network. Thus, after providing an opportunity for interested commercial operators to proactively bid, any remaining markets would fall back to a competitive selection process run by the PSST. Thus, every market in the country would be assigned a licensee. The imperative is to get the process moving. The FCC should not wait for legislation, but should develop rules now for a successful auction of D-block licenses. If reallocation legislation is adopted, this work will still have moved the ball forward on standards, and the FCC can readily adapt its rules. So to summarize, shared network and shared use meets both goals, public safety and competitive broadband deployment. Either path can work, properly crafted legislation or a two-stage auction, provided it includes opportunities for full commercial partnership and non-national operator participation. We believe an auction can be successful and would generate revenues for the Treasury. The key is to move forward, and the FCC should do so now under its existing authority. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this testimony.
Thank you, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's because they have misspelled your name on your card. They have an E in it, so you're Hanley, not Hanley. So I'm a good proofreader. Thank you very much for your testimony. Dr., let's see if I pronounce your name correctly. Liopiros? Good. Welcome.
Thank you. Acting Chairman Eshoo, Ranking Member Stearns, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the issue of a National Interoperable Broadband Network for Public Safety. My name is Kostas Liopiros, and I am the principal of the Sunfire Group, independent technology management consultancy, located in Alexandria, Virginia. Sound policy dictates that spectrum should be allocated and assigned in a manner that benefits all Americans. The approach that best serves both the public safety community and consumers will be to auction the D block solely for commercial use, with the proceeds of the auction used to help fund a nationwide public safety broadband network on the 10 megahertz of 700 megahertz spectrum that has already been allocated for public safety. This approach will provide the funds needed to develop a state-of-the-art interoperable public safety broadband network while providing sorely needed spectrum for the advanced wireless broadband services that consumers now demand. Public safety communications are critically important for the public welfare, and they need to be improved, especially in support of first responders. In general, public safety communication systems are still not fully interoperable, making it difficult for public safety agencies and first responders to communicate with one another. Further, public safety systems generally do not provide the wireless broadband capabilities increasingly commonplace in the commercial market that are becoming essential to the sharing of data. The federal government has allocated a great deal of spectrum in order to solve these problems. Nearly 100 megahertz of spectrum, 99.7 megahertz to be precise, has been allocated for public safety use. Of this nearly 100 megahertz total, less than about 17 megahertz between 150 and 169 megahertz is used currently to support the majority of public safety communication systems. The remaining spectrum, which has been allocated public safety since 1996, is still not widely used. This includes the 24 megahertz of prime spectrum and the 700 megahertz band, of which 10 megahertz has been designated for public safety broadband services. At this point, lack of spectrum is not the key impediment to improving public safety communications. Congress has granted public safety spectrum for free, but as you've heard many times today, funds to use the spectrum to construct a nationwide broadband network are still lacking. Public safety agencies need funding to build and maintain a public safety broadband network in the 700 megahertz band. With the current economic crisis and severe resource constraints that confront most local and state governments, obtaining these funds is even more challenging than ever. Without financial support, a nationwide interoperable broadband public safety network will not be possible. Congress needs to address the funding needs, especially as public safety moves to adopt broadband communications. As a first step, I recommend that Congress should strongly consider legislation to enable the FCC to auction the 700 megahertz D block for purely commercial use and direct the proceeds of that auction to the public safety community for the construction and maintenance of a public safety broadband network. Although the proceeds from the auction may not be sufficient to fully fund a nationwide public safety broadband network, they will provide a very substantial and valuable down payment on the network, kickstarting construction, and making the remaining funding challenges much more manageable than before. Now, the existing 10 megahertz of 700 megahertz spectrum that has already been allocated to public safety is, I believe, sufficient to support an interoperable broadband network, especially given the new efficient wireless broadband technologies now coming available. More than 10 cities and/or states have already sought FCC approval to begin construction of broadband networks on the existing 10 megahertz of public safety spectrum in the 700 megahertz band using long-term evolution technology, which is the recommended follow-on to the GSM standard. A number of public safety organizations and agencies have also endorsed the use of long-term evolution technologies for constructing public safety broadband networks. Well, LTE has multiple and scalable channel bandwidths and by design can accommodate the 2.5 megahertz allocations in the 10 megahertz public safety broadband plan. By adopting LTE technologies, public safety can leverage the ongoing commercial developments in infrastructure and equipment to reduce network deployment and operation costs. Unlike public safety, however, the commercial wireless industry does face a spectrum crunch. Growing demands for new advanced wireless broadband services, including wireless broadband, can be met only if sufficient spectrum is available for wireless carriers to provide these services. Wireless carriers in the U.S. have estimated the wireless industry will need access to at least an additional 200 megahertz of commercial spectrum within 5 years in order to meet growing consumer demand. That's a 5-year forecast. The International Telecommunications Union, in studies preparatory to the 2007 World Radio Conference, WORC 7, has estimated that by the year 2010, about 1 gigahertz of additional spectrum will be needed globally. Auctioning 700 megahertz D block for commercial purposes would enhance the opportunities for the provision of competitive broadband services by existing carriers as well as new entrants. Of course, 10 megahertz of spectrum will not of itself alleviate the projected commercial spectrum shortage. Clearly, more needs to be done in terms of identifying and allocating spectrum for future commercial use, but it is a good first step and represents the best alternative use of the spectrum as I have discussed. In ideal circumstances, unrestricted amounts of spectrum would be available to meet the demands of all commercial carriers and public safety agencies. However, that is not the case. Spectrum is a rare and important national resource. Congress must balance the needs of public safety with that of consumers and focus on the best solution that considers existing conditions and future opportunities. Auctioning the D block for commercial use will provide a much-needed infusion of funds to jumpstart the construction of a national interoperable broadband network for public safety while facilitating competition in the wireless marketplace. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the invitation to testify today. I will welcome any questions the committee may have.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Liopiros, and thanks to all of our witnesses for their testimony here this morning. I have several questions, and the first one I think can be answered with simple yes or no answers. And so let me go down the row. I'm going to start with Chief Bratton. Dr. Liopiros has just talked about the adequacy of the 10 megahertz of spectrum currently in the hands of the Public Safety Spectrum Trust for utilization of the broadband services that we hope to see built out on a nationwide basis. If I understood his comments correctly, he's suggesting that the latest generation of wireless technology, LTE, should be satisfactory to enable that 10 megahertz to serve your needs. Is there general agreement that the 10 megahertz is enough and that we can then look for alternative ways of disposing of the 10 megahertz D block? Chief Bratton? Mr. Fonts, Dr. Fonts? I'm sorry?
Excuse me. Difficult yes or no.
Be brief, please.
Pardon?
Be brief, please.
Probably not.
Okay, that's 2 no's. Chief McEwen?
No.
3. Mr. Barbour?
With my limited knowledge, no.
That's 4.
No.
Yeah, that's you said no. That's 5. Mr.
No.
Knapp? Okay. Well, Dr. Liopiros, you seem to be outvoted. I hope, yes, please. Please turn your microphone on. Thank you.
It's a question of requirements, sir, and I haven't really seen any good studies, analysis that says it's sufficient or not sufficient. A lot of the evidence I hear is anecdotal. Of course, 20 megahertz is better than 10 megahertz. It gives you more capacity. 30 megahertz, 40 megahertz is better than 10 megahertz.
But you're suggesting that 10 megahertz with appropriate technology would be good for the basic needs?
I'm suggesting that it will be good, at least for a start. The agencies that apply for the...
I'm going to move on because I've got some other questions.
All right, sir.
But thank you. I'm not trying to cut you off. I just have limited time. The problem, of course, is if we take not only the 10 megahertz currently in the hands of the trust, but add to that the D block and provide that to the public safety community, then we don't have the D block available to help us in any way with the financing costs for building out in what would then be 20 megahertz of spectrum with the requisite technology. The debate up until now has focused on possible creative ways to use the D block to obtain financing for build-out of equipment in the 10 megahertz that the public safety community already has. And we're going to continue to focus on that while considering your comments that it would be nice to have an additional allocation of spectrum beyond the 10 megahertz. We're going to look for creative ideas that go beyond what I now have counted as 4 different proposals for utilization of the D block. Those 4 proposals are an auction that involves a public-private partnership, somewhat along the lines of the failed auction in 2008, just a straight sale of D block to a commercial provider who prevails at auction, a gift of that D block to the public safety community, and then I think Dr. Fonts put a 4th possible approach on the table today by suggesting that there be an auction to a public-private partnership of all 20 megahertz, the 10 megahertz now in the hands of public safety plus the D block. That is a proposal I think made this morning for the first time. So I'm going to ask for some brief comments from each of you, and my time has almost expired, so again, be as brief as you can. Of these proposals before us, do any of these appeal to you? Do you think that there is some way that if we pursued any of these approaches, we would derive the financing necessary to assure that the equipment is supplied in the spectrum to have a nationwide network? I'm told that the price of that might be anywhere between 10 and 20 billion, and just a pure auction of the D block, I'm also told, might derive no more than 3 billion. So that's about 10% of what the total cost would be. This is the conundrum we face. How do we go about doing this? So just a quick answer. Your recommendations against the 4 proposals currently here, and if you don't like any of those, let me have your own idea of what you think would work. Chief Bratton, do you want to begin?
Thank you, sir. Reinforcing my testimony that we believe it should just be given over to public safety, and that would allow immediate movement of the waiver city requests where they already have the capability to start moving forward. That would allow also, by implementation of those, some 13, I think the number of waivers, to get up and running. We can start evaluating the efficacy of the systems that they're putting into place. And as I've testified, that we believe that would be an investment and not a cost in the sense of giving it over to us. We really do believe that there is an ability to meet both major city needs but also the rural needs, as Harlin McEwen has talked about in his testimony.
I assume that if it were given to you, if you subleased it or otherwise disposed of it, that would produce some amount of revenue that you could use to build out. Do you think that would produce sufficient revenue for you to build out, or would you have to look to the local government in Los Angeles for the balance?
There would be, I think, with what we're proposing, there would be no uniform way of moving forward. It really would be dependent on local, regional initiatives. And
so you're saying local resources would have to supplement whatever revenue you derived?
That is a possibility, or local resources that come in through other funding sources. It does allow for a variety of ways to fund this as far as moving forward.
Right. Well, thank you. Let me move on, given the limitation of time. Dr. Fonts, just very briefly, and address, if you would, the problem in rural areas where the local resources might not be adequate to supplement whatever is derived from disposing of the D block were it given to the locality.
And that essentially is what Nina's concern has been all along. In a report that many of my colleagues in public safety has endorsed, in that report itself, it says that for many years to come, and it would take many years under this private partner relationship and then allowing public safety to negotiate agreements, it would take many years to build a near ubiquitous service. And in the interim, public safety in many parts of the country, including rural America, will have to rely on commercial services.
All right. Now, Dr. Fonts, thank you. I'm going to move on to Chief McEwen.
Well, as the chairman of the Public Safety Spectrum Trust, I've been involved in discussions, ongoing discussions with all of the possible commercial players. The large two players in the 700 megahertz arena are AT&T and Verizon. I've been talking with U.S. Cellular, who's seated here today. I've had discussions with rural carriers in several states and with the National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative. There are a number of people who tell me, not a businessman, I'm a public safety person, that this is a possible outcome, a good outcome, if we have that spectrum, that we could partner with people in rural areas and in the major urban areas to make this happen.
To make the build out happen?
That's right, to make a build out using, in some cases, existing commercial infrastructure, and in other cases, possibly building out in rural areas where it needs to be built out. So I believe it's possible.
Okay, thank you, Chief McEwen. Mr. Barbour, very briefly, please.
The two plans I think that only speak to funding for rural America is the continued public-private partnership auction, or auctioning it all off with the proceeds going to public safety.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Black, is it the water pitchers? Thank you. Mr. Black.
Yes, thank you. Well, we continue to believe a bottoms-up approach, taking this at the regional level, and for each individual regions to take into consideration the surrounding rural communities. They have existing funding mechanisms that they have available to them now. They have also grants available to them, PSIC, UASI, and other ones. And then, of course, the lease of spectrum that they could do by having the additional 10 megahertz would provide additional revenue source. And then finally, using the leveraged network model would greatly reduce the amount of capital required to build in that area.
Thank you. Mr. Hanley.
So shared network model using 20 megahertz of spectrum and leveraging operator assets, it will be the lowest cost, and that reduces the funding requirement. Shared use, allowing commercial capacity to be deployed on the network, will contribute value, which will allow the cost to public safety of the network to be reduced. There are several ways to get there, but the key is that we have to get to a shared model with a full partnership between public safety and commercial operators.
All right. Dr. Liopiros, very briefly, please.
The two options that will reduce the funding requirements, will not eliminate them, are the auctioning the spectrum commercial use and giving the proceeds to public safety, or the option that Nina proposed in terms of combining the spectrum auction and giving some of the proceeds to public safety. Why half instead of all the proceeds, I'm not sure, but that would certainly contribute.
Well, thank you all very much, and I have taken a large amount of time here. The Chair intends to be very generous with other members in terms of their questioning time. Let me just comment that I appreciate the thoughtfulness you have applied to this. I'm not sure that any of these proposals, if implemented, derive the revenues that we have to have in order to build out this spectrum, particularly in rural areas where local resources are quite limited and could not supplement whatever revenue comes from whatever utilization is made of the D block. And so my thought is that at the end of the day, we're going to find ourselves looking for some kind of general fund revenues in order to finance this. So I honestly don't know another avenue that we have open that can provide the assurance we have to have that we're going to get where we need to be. My time has expired, and at this point I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns. I guess I'm not going to be recognizing Mr. Stearns. My, how you've changed. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have two, and maybe a third one if I have time, but it's going to go to the whole panel, and it's based upon the opening statements that I made. First of all, if the Commission were to re-auction the D block, or if Congress decided to intervene, how should the license be divided, or should they? Should there be a national license, or should there be a subdivision, and what would that subdivision be if there were to be one? There's a lot of us who believe that a national license obviously was part of the problem. You know, it didn't do the trick. So let me start with Chief Bratton first and just go from your right to left, my left to right, and if you would answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Perspective that either one would work. That either one would work.
A national or any subdivision?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think in encouraging more competitors, I think regional licenses, whether it's a collection of states or breaking down the state level, probably attract more participants to the auction and enable more rural participation.
The Public Safety Spectrum Trust can support either option. The regional approach is probably the more practical one now, having the failed first auction.
And let me chime in, because part of the question was regions as defined how. Do we have a better way of defining regions? And I mean, if you don't, that's fine, but if because of your expertise, if you know of one, if you could share that, that would be.
In the third further notice, which is on the record, that was put out last year, never went anyplace, it did suggest a regional approach for 50-some regions. In other words, it was based on the 700 megahertz regions now, plus a couple of offshore regions. So there is a regional makeup that we basically supported in those comments.
Thank you.
I think the wish list would be a national licensee, but I think in reality it's going to be a regional approach.
If it's a re-auction, we would support a regional approach.
U.S. Cellular would support a regional approach, and we agree with the 55 regional planning areas or states as a model for doing that.
I too would support a regional approach. I think it would get more commercial carriers involved in the implementation of the system.
Thank you. That's better than I would have expected as far as a consistent response. So I think that does show some movement, Mr. Chairman. The other issue would be, and I talked about it before, is two things. One is I've always been concerned that we don't have standardization of equipment out there. And so the question, I mean, I'm talking about nationally now. There may be some within departments and areas. But also I raised the issue of the expiration or the statutory deadline and the funding authority of September 30th, 2010. And I raised that with there is one bill, H.R. 3348, which would grant extensions to allow us to roll out. Would you be in supportive of us moving rapidly to extending that ability? And Chief, if you would start and then go back down.
Definitely, I would support the standard equipment, and I think all of public safety agree that LT is de facto standard. And then with respect to the funding authority, I would support it.
Yeah, let me follow. The fact that they've agreed, does it mean that it is?
No.
Okay, and so something there probably should be some certitude based upon law or rulemaking of a standard.
I assume you're talking about the extension of the PSIC grants? Is that what you're talking about? Okay, well, first of all, I think we are in support, public safety, of extending those grants, but those grants, as currently written, are not intended to fund this type of an operation. They are.
I understand that, but it's still, you know, as Anna knows, we work on emergency response, 911 issues, and so this is our chance to continue to raise other aspects.
Well, we would support that, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that money wouldn't really bring anything to this issue.
We, in our opportunity to ask questions that are important to us, we take every opportunity to do that.
Right. Definitely support it. Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we would defer to our public safety partners in support.
U.S. Cellular would support the extension.
I, too, would support that.
Thank you very much. And, Mr. Chairman, with that, my time has expired.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I knew that bell was going to go off. Just an observation, and we were talking about spectrum and how it can be used. I can't help but think of the spectrum here from an Angelian with, I think, a Boston Irish accent to the other end of the spectrum, a wonderful Greek and Deep South accent from North Carolina, only in America. So we've got our own spectrum here. I want to ask some questions about the money, because that's what's going to fuel this. I know that choices need to be made, and I think the chairman did an excellent job of outlining basically 4 ways to go, what we have in front of us. You know, I mean, there's the subleasing in terms of money can come from subleasing the spectrum or the money that's taken off the top of an auction or the partnerships. Now, Chief McEwen, you mentioned that you've met with all commercial players. What's the price tag on this? To have a ubiquitous system. See, what I'm afraid of, or I'm fearful of in some of these ideas is I'm worried about inner cities and rural areas. They don't really have any leverage. I don't think they have leverage anyway. That's my own take on it. So in talking to the commercial interests, what's the total sum of money that's needed nationally where we have a ubiquitous system? And, you know, I mean, anytime we get into the weeds on this stuff, I take myself back to 9/11, to that fateful day where there was no interoperability between police and fire. God only knows who would have survived if we had the kind of system that almost a decade later we're trying to build out. So this is very real. So what do you think, or anyone else, the price tag is for this?
Well, first of all, nobody, I think, knows.
Nobody knows.
And so I would tell you that there have been numbers as low as 20 billion and as high as 40 billion. But what we have done is to basically ignore all of that. And the reason is that if we leverage, as has been suggested by Mr. Black, some of the existing infrastructure in the large companies, the small companies, and the rural companies, and then use public-private partnerships to pay for the rest of the rural area, we believe that you could save a lot of money. In other words, this basically becomes achievable through that kind of a structure. And that 20 billion or whatever it is really means nothing at the end of the day, because if you use the existing infrastructure of the carriers, U.S. Cellular, there are rural carriers that have infrastructure. The National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative has tremendous infrastructure, tower sites, all kinds of things that we could leverage upon to save money to make this an affordable project.
Does anyone else want to comment on it?
I would say just briefly, the cost depends obviously on the specifications of the network. Which
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
The total cost depends on what the specifications are for the network. So there is indeed a range. I think the key from a funding perspective is to make that network as efficient as possible using the efficiencies that LTE provides in a larger 20 megahertz band, leveraging as much of the operator's existing infrastructure as possible, and allowing commercial operators to get value out of the system.
I understand that the part that I don't want to come to, the scenario that I don't want to see in this hearing room is we've gone off, we've designed this, we've made our choices, and now we're coming back to you because there's a tremendous shortfall, and therefore we don't have a ubiquitous system. We need to drill down to see how this thing is going to, what's needed to build this system. I think we have the building blocks for it. I think we're smart enough and we have the technologies to know what we want it to deliver. But you know what? Around here, price tags really do matter. And if there's going to be a shortfall for half of the $40 billion, then we need to take that into consideration in terms of what we do. I don't want to short circuit what we want to build because we come up short on the money. And I can't believe that we don't know that there's a range here between $20 and $40 billion. It's not fault or blame. I'm just saying that we really need to plan this better. I don't know. I don't have any time left. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Instructive hearing. Thank you for all of you for being here today. And to our West Coast chief, thank you for the job that you do in the City of Angels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eshu. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's one of the key questions, how much is this going to cost? Now, I think my staff and I thought it was 10 to 15 billion. So when someone mentioned 40 billion, that's quite larger than we expect. Mr. Hanley, do you think it would cost as much as 40 billion? I mean, the range I heard was 10 to 15 billion, just quickly.
Yeah, if it's purpose-built and dedicated with no leverage of existing infrastructure and it's built to a very, very, very high standard, it could be at the high end of that range.
Okay. And Dr. Liopiros, do you think it could get by from 10 to 15 billion?
Excuse me, I point to some of the developments in terms of the municipalities that want to build out networks now. They're doing it with their own funds.
Yeah.
You project that for the cost to cover the nation. I think you come up with a lower figure than people are quoting.
Yeah.
But it really boils down to, as Mr. Hanley mentioned before, what are the requirements for the system? What do you want it to do?
Okay.
And I suggest maybe people aren't really quite sure what they want it to do, and maybe they're just kind of say, well, let's get as much spectrum as possible to cover any future growth.
But auctioning off the D block might not only, it won't even approach getting this money, maybe get $2 or $3 billion. So the real question comes down to, the fundamental question is, where are we going to get the money to do this? Now, I think after listening to you, many of us are starting to think that perhaps the government through general revenue should provide this. I think the chairman talked about this. And so I think what we have here is it's so important. In fact, the public safety community in September 11th, 1996 indicated that we need to have a broadband network for public safety. So it's sort of ironical that on September 11th, when they issued a report in 1996, they talked about it. So the need is out there. We've got to get moving. So if we can't agree on anything, we should agree that we've got to get the revenue from somewhere, and perhaps general revenue is an area that we could look at it. So the next question is, if we get to general revenue, should we use a D block in combination with the 24 megahertz, or can we put it all in the 24 megahertz? And I guess, Dr. Liopiros, why couldn't we use just the 24 megahertz spectrum, take the D block, auction it off to the broadband private sector, get the money for that? That would increase the broadband capability, so all of us in our wireless would be enhanced, and then use the 24 megahertz as the network for public safety. Is that doable? Just
well,
yes.
I think that is doable over time, yes.
Okay. Now, within that, there's some question of whether 10 of it should be broadband and 14 of it should be voice. Is it possible that we could use VoIP, the voice over internet, and we could use the whole 24 for broadband with voice over internet so that the entire 24 megahertz is available? So is that technically possible? Is that a sense that that would be reliable?
Technically, it's possible. VoIP it will be provided by LTE, and also the developments in LTE that allow them to also support the traditional circuit switched voice applications as well. Currently, public safety is oriented towards two separate approaches, the traditional narrowband voice, and over that's going to be overlaid a wideband capability, the broadband capability. But I think over time, you can actually bet on what's going to happen is that combining the two blocks and having a one wider broadband capability support both narrowband voice applications as well as broadband capabilities. Okay. And that makes more efficient use of the total spectrum.
Yeah. Is public safety already talking about VoIP in some way?
I know some have talked about using it. I don't know what the official position is.
Okay. Yeah, Chief?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're asking the wrong person here. I mean, we're the public safety people, and he's a commercial guy. Here's the issue.
Well, I'm looking for somebody who's an engineer.
I know. Well, but here's the issue.
I mean,
right
I think, didn't you work for the Department of Defense at one time?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to discredit him, because I think
I won't discredit him, but I
still have friends
right
there.
Answer. Huh? The answer is very simple. At the moment, today, as we sit here, there is no broadband technology on the drawing board or planned to replace mission-critical voice as public safety knows it today. That's a dangerous thing, a leap of faith for people to assume that you could just build a broadband network to take the place of mission-critical voice systems.
Okay, I accept that. I accept that. I mean, that's true. But how about this? If you take and give 14 megahertz for voice and 10 megahertz for broadband, and use the 24 megahertz as a network for public safety. Chief, would that be satisfactory to you?
See, the problem is that the 24 megahertz, the reason it was split into half being narrowband voice for mission-critical land mobile systems is because that is critical to us today. We can't abandon that because there is no alternative. VoIP broadband is not acceptable for mission-critical systems, and the technology that's being built, it just isn't.
Okay. All right. Well, I just conclude, Mr. Chairman, just by saying that, is it possible, Dr. Hanley, that with the 24 megahertz between voice 14 and broadband 10 would be satisfactory? Just yes or no. Either one of you. Just yes or no.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Hanley?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. That's good. That's good.
Okay, we're going to stand in recess. We got about 3 minutes left to vote. Congresswoman Harmon's going to come right back, and she should have voted. She should be back here any second. We'll keep this hearing going. Members are going to vote and run right back. So we'll just ask you to hold tight. We'll be in recess until Congresswoman Harmon or someone back on this side can take the chair.
The hearing will reconvene. I would note the supreme irony that I, a former member of this subcommittee, came back today because I feel so strongly about this subject, and now I'm chairing the subcommittee. Go figure. At any rate, thank you all for coming, and I want to reiterate the message that you have already heard and that you agree with, which is we need to get on with this. Does anyone disagree with that? No. Yesterday, at the request of Chairman Waxman, I introduced H.R. 3633, which is to extend the PSIC grant program for 1 year, and then after that to extend it on a case-by-case basis. That is because, as all of you know, there were some delays in DHS's action, and we think that that unfairly burdens you, those of you who are in the law enforcement business at a time when state and local budgets are flat to negative. So hopefully it will pass the Senate. Senators Rockefeller and Hutchinson have introduced it there. That would be good news since they are the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, and with Congressman Waxman's support, I would think we'd be in good shape here too. So relief is coming. Having said that, however, as some of you commented, that is not the same as this. Having grants for equipment at the local level is not the same thing as building out a national interoperable network. And I want to ask a couple of questions about that. But first, I do want to say to my own chief that we will miss you. Your record is extraordinary. The one thing you didn't get done was this project, which I assigned you some years ago, and you failed me. But aside from that, Los Angeles residents, including me, are very, very grateful for your service, and we wish you well. And as my good friend, you and I know, will stay in touch. So my question about this is the following. I heard the discussion about regional build-out. That's okay, with me anyway. I also heard the discussion about, do we use public money since the auction has not succeeded as of yet or not? I don't know what the best answer is there, but my bottom line is let's just do it the best way we can, as quickly as we can. But my question is this. I have been concerned that we might be pedaling backwards, and I want to explain that. That we might be, at least some parts of the country, might be building out local interoperable networks, but those networks are not interoperable with other networks. So in other words, sort of the way I see it, we are going operable around the country, but we are making it harder to go interoperable because those networks don't converge in the way they would need to. And I see Chief McEwen nodding, so I'm going to ask him first, but then ask for some other comments.
Well, it's a legitimate concern, and we have been addressing that concern. The National Public Safety Telecommunications Council formed a broadband task force to address that issue, and they have just released their report to us. We're in the process of reviewing that, and that is an attempt to make sure that these early build-outs in San Francisco, New York City, Boston, wherever, are going to be fully interoperable with any of the rest of the network as it's built out. We're absolutely convinced that we have the ability to do that and that we have the necessary tools to move that forward and not have that a problem.
Is that a promise?
That's a promise, because if it doesn't, I represent both the small guys in the police world and the big guys, and if I don't perform for both, I'm basically out of a job.
And you represent the rural guys and the urban guys.
I do.
Because that matters to me, too. I mean, as all of you know, have spent a lot of years focused on what could happen here, and it could happen in our smallest communities as well as our largest. And since the attacks in the future will be asymmetric, I mean, that is the tradecraft of our enemy, it very easily could happen in small areas that at the moment aren't adequately networked. Do others of you have comments? Chief Bratton, do you want to defend yourself against my comments? I think your microphone's not on.
That is my understanding that this will be addressed. I'd like to, if I may, that as a follow-on to the question that was going on just before the break about the cost of this and the wide variety of estimates, that to put a perspective on it, the system that we've been designing over the last 4 years in Los Angeles involving Los Angeles County 45 cities, the area covered by the sheriff, fire, county, and city. We estimate that system for that 10 million person area would be about a $700 million project just for that area to get interoperability the way we're designing it.
Yes, sir.
I do believe that interoperability is critically important, and I certainly support that. I think in the broadband context, interoperability, and particularly the work that's been done by the Council, has been very helpful in working on roaming and interoperability. I, too, would like to add one additional point to the funding issue, and that is simply that to get a one-time shot of money does very little to enable public safety to plan and build for the future. And so there is essentially a need, and Chairman Boucher summarized that, there is a need for, in this case, perhaps General Treasury monies in some way, shape, or form to provide that capability of planning so that you will know from one year to the next what you need and what you have to spend. It's basically how we run our households, and no, public safety is essentially the same.
If I could just insert there, and we do have a little more time because we don't have any other members here, so as the new chair of this subcommittee, I'm planning to take a little more time. The stability of funding and the amount of funding are clearly relevant, and as Chief Bratton well knows, $700 million is not chump change. That is a lot of money. I think as important as the funding and sustainability questions there are the questions, and they may have been asked in my absence, about whether our build-out will be state-of-the-art and future-proof. And so let me just ask our private sector partners to put that back on the table, too, in the context of sustainable funding and amount of funding. I mean, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, from AT&T's perspective, the choice of LTE is an excellent choice because it is the state-of-the-art, and it is also evolving. That's why they call it long-term evolution. The fact that the public safety has chosen it means that they're going to be able to ride the coattails of an industry that already has proved to be very, very strong in terms of technological advancement. And to that end, AT&T participated in the same broadband task force that Chief McEwen mentioned. And to your point about a sense of urgency, we've actually been very bullish about this. And once there was consensus among the public safety community about going to LTE, we've become proactive in working with our device vendors of adding the public safety spectrum to the commercial spectrum to try to drive down the cost. And we think that's the kind of partnership that needs to happen.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just echo the comment about LTE. I think that's very important to achieving sustainability. But we have to recognize that the network will evolve. I think folks that build networks will have to take on the responsibility for remaining interoperable, even if that requires investments in the future. I think also the sustainability of the overall ecosystem of devices will be enhanced by having commercial users be part of that process. That's another reason for shared use.
Well, I strongly agree with that. I represent a part of the country that makes most of our intelligence satellites, and over the years we've been able to evolve better and better capability because a lot of those satellite makers also make commercial satellites. And the dual-use nature of those buses and even some of the stuff that's put on them has enabled it to evolve better. So I am strongly in favor of a public-private partnership and of an evolving architecture that will help law enforcement see the future, and grandparents in Congress see the future in ways that we might not otherwise. So that makes a lot of sense. Let me just finally ask you, as a very impatient person who's only spent about 8 years pushing on this, when do you really think we will get there from here?
Well, we're never going to get there until you help us get there. I can guarantee you that. So it is a matter of making decisions The decision we're asking you to make right now is to pass legislation to take the D block off the auction block. Either that has to happen or there has to be an auction. And the problem is that at the moment we don't know when either of those may happen. So, I mean, it isn't going to go forward till one of those happen.
Yes.
I would reverse the priority. I would think that the most important thing, if I were in your shoes as chairman, I think the most important thing is to ensure that there is funding available on a recurring basis. With that funding available, whether it's a all owned and controlled by public safety environment, or even if it is a shared partnership with the private world, that funding is essential to, you made a reference to the buses and how they can plan on the buses on these satellites. It's exactly what's going to happen in a broadband world. You've got to be able to pay for and plan and pay for the applications that will benefit all of us in public safety. So funding on a recurring basis is essential.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just conclude my hearing with the observation that you're all right and that progress in individual counties and cities, especially huge ones like LA County and City, is critical. Sustained funding is critical. Congress acting is critical. The FCC acting is critical. And industry staying at the cutting edge is critical. So I think this is our most urgent project. 9/11 happened to us, or 9/11 exposed two big fissures in our capability. One was we had a lot of stovepiped intelligence agencies that couldn't talk to each other or even talk to themselves in the case of one agency. And the other was that we had a completely inadequate interoperable communications system. And the combination of those two things resulted in catastrophic damage and loss of life in America, and it's something we will never forget. So we have done substantial work to fix the lack of information sharing in our government. We've done intelligence reform. We've done all kinds of things that I think have put us in a much better place with respect to that. But we have done far too little to build out a truly national interoperable communications network. And you folks are all bright and you know what's needed, and I think most of the folks on this committee on a bipartisan basis are committed to make it happen. Now we just have to do it. And I thank you for staying during the voting period, and I want to express my gratitude to all on this committee for naming me the new chair of the subcommittee. Subcommittee hearing is adjourned.